Welcome to today's episode, today's masterclass on the art of teaching yoga. My name is Wenlin. If this is the first time we're meeting, it's a huge pleasure to meet you and to be here with you. I'm a yoga teacher trainer and yoga instructor based in Turin, Italy, originally from Singapore. So I created the art of teaching yoga to provide more resources and support for, especially for new yoga teachers. As you begin, you might feel that it is a daunting task to begin to teach yoga in a confident and impactful way. So these series of masterclasses have been created to support you, and today's masterclass is all about alignment. And with regards to the masterclass, if you're tuning in live, please let me know in the comments. You can feel free. This is really more of a question and answer. So if you have any questions, I will be so glad to be able to see them and to reply. So I'll be checking in from time to time to see if anyone has any questions about today's episode. Okay, so let's begin. So today's episode is all focused about alignment. And probably in your 200-hour yoga teacher training, for those of you who have done it, or you're maybe in the process of completing it, or even in your 300-hour, maybe you did advanced asana, in which you learned how to, for example, teach certain more intermediate to advanced poses to your students. We talk and focus a lot about alignment of the poses and the postures. And today I wanted to focus on the idea of the problem about alignment. Because much of this stress related to teaching yoga is deciding what cues to say and how to guide your student into the specific pose or the shape. And the shape is indeed very important because that's how we see it, right? It is a pose. But before we dive into it, I want to talk a little bit about anatomy. And probably if you only did a 200-hour, or even if you did a 300-hour, maybe chances are that within your yoga teacher training, you might have spent 200 hours, of the 200 hours, you might have only spent 20 hours or less studying anatomy. And this could be one of the main reasons why you feel a little bit intimidated about teaching yoga to new students, or as a new teacher, you might feel, I'm not sure what's the name of this body part, or I don't know what's the function of this specific area or how it moves. So this anatomy is very closely tied to alignment, and I want to talk a little bit about it. And if you haven't watched the episode on the expert interview with Bernie Clark, I highly recommend it. Later on, after this episode ends, I will share the link for that within the comments so you can click and watch it directly. So that episode already, if you've watched it, some of it will overlap a little bit with what we're covering today. And the premise of it is that when we study anatomy, most of the time, even within your yoga teacher training, all the images shown in even medical textbooks, right, they are averages. So averages means you take an entire population of people with different lengths of their humerus bone. Humerus is your arm bone here, right, or your femur bone, which is your thigh bone, the length, and you sum it all up and then you average it by the number of people, and therefore you come up with this number, which is so-called a representation, right, of all the people that are within this sample or this population. And that's great. It gives you an idea of roughly what the middle is, right, of all the variants. But the huge problem is it doesn't capture the variance and the richness of this entire population. And there is so much variation with regards to the bodies that we, as yoga teachers, instructors, whatever you want to call yourself or however you see yourself as, in your students. When you start to work with real people, with real bodies, with aches, with pains, with injuries, with all kinds of interesting conditions, or maybe even not even interesting conditions, but with specific backgrounds, you will realize that the variation and the difference between one student and the other is so big. And this is not just in terms of muscular anatomy, it's also in terms of skeletal anatomy. And the first example I want to give is myself. Because as a student of yoga for a long time, I was told that I was hyper-extending my elbows. If you can see here, holding it horizontal, you can see my elbow actually, when I lock the elbow joint, it actually goes beyond this 180 degree. And you often see this in many bodies that are Asian. Often in Asia, you will see skeletal structures that are like this. So it has a little bit to do with genetics. But is there a problem with this? Technically, no. If this is a weight-bearing joint, then yes. But if you ask me when I do this, like when I lengthen my arm and then I bend to contract my bicep, I feel no pain at all. So there's actually no problem at all with this hyperextension. And this hyperextension is not the problem. So now let's go back to the topic of alignment. Why did I talk about this hyperextension? I want to talk about how the variance in anatomy translates to the problem of how we cue lessons using this principle of alignment. And many of you might be familiar with the concept of this idea of good alignment, which is cueing specifically so that your student matches this textbook-like image. For example, let's give another example of Warrior 2. And there's this huge debate over whether when in Warrior 2, so let's say you're in Warrior 2 and your right leg knee is bent, right? Your foot is facing towards the front of the mat, and then your back leg is abducted, which is moving away from the midline towards the back and turned out. So there's this huge debate over whether the front heel should intersect the back arch, or whether the front heel should intersect maybe or touch or be aligned with the back heel. The question is not which is correct, but the question is for which body does this feel right? Because there's so much variation, and within Warrior 2 a lot is going on. So there's this turning out or external rotation, we call this moving out of the knee outwards from the midline, externally rotating of your front leg, the femur bone away, and then you're abducting both legs, which is moving both legs apart from each other. So all of this, like for example, how wide your pelvis is, for example, how much you can externally rotate your legs, will all affect what is good alignment for you. And therefore, us as teachers, even though, for example, maybe in your 200-hour yoga teacher training, your teachers have told you, oh, it should be front heel intersects the back arch, and your knees should be completely aligned with your ankle, and as much as possible, you should be using if you do assist, or if you believe in hands-on assist and adjustments as well, what you often see is you see instructors asking students to move all the way towards the wall, and they'll place one palm on the other pelvis and the other palm on the inside of the knee and yank to push them apart. And this is anatomically, it's really, when I see this, it's extremely painful, because much of this, right, as much as it is well intended, does not reflect sound understanding of anatomy and respect this variance and richness of the differences in skeletal variation between one person and the other. So the first question and the most important thing is that I want to dispel is there's no universal alignment. And if you don't believe this, if this is very strange to you, if this is the first time you're hearing this, I would invite you to experiment. And the next masterclass, I'll be talking a little bit more about it towards the end of the episode, will be a bit experiential. We'll try a couple of different poses and we can play around and you can see what alignment works best for you and how it feels in your body. So the next point I want to talk about is the idea of functional anatomy or functional alignment versus aesthetic yoga. What is functional yoga and what's aesthetic yoga? When we cue, right, which is using the language to guide your students, we can tell students what the pose looks like. And then based on these parameters, your students adjust their bodies so that they get into the pose and then they look like this. The other approach is to tell the students the purpose or the function of what they are doing and where they might be feeling certain things because of what is happening inside their body instead of what it looks like from the outside. So I know if this is the first time you're hearing this, what is functional, yoga or functional anatomy and also aesthetic yoga, just take a moment and process this, and I invite you to take this with an open mind. So let's come back to the idea of Warrior 2. Warrior 2 has the legs moving apart. When you move the legs apart, what happens? You stretch the muscles that are on the insides of the legs, elongate. and the muscles on the outside, the thighs, they contract, because that's what happens when you lift the legs apart from each other. The muscles along the outside, they have to contract to lift the leg up. Just like, for example, let's say I'm lifting this arm up. What's happening is the muscles along the top, they're contracting to lift, and then these muscles are lengthening. And the same here, imagine this lever and I'm using my bicep. So I'm using this point here to pull this whole length of my forearm in, and you can use your palm to palpate and feel, my bicep is actually working. And then when I move it away from the midline, what happens? The muscle lengthens. So the approach to this cueing more from a place of feeling from inwards instead of what it looks like from the outside is what I highly encourage you as a teacher to start to move towards. I know even if this is completely new to you and it might feel daunting and you might not be sure how to begin to do this will take time, and also comes from your own experience when you learn, when you move, when you attend other people's classes as well. I highly encourage you to start thinking about this and to start to experience this. When you attend the class, or when, for example, you begin to move maybe through sun salutations, as you inhale and you float your arms up towards the sky, what do you feel when you come in towards a back bend? Do you notice that the front of your chest, the whole anterior part of your body, the front part of your body, the muscles lengthen and your back muscles contract? And then as you exhale, as you fold forward, imagine the same thing happening but in the opposite direction. When you fold, your abdominal muscles, the whole front of your body, the muscles are contracting to close your belly towards the thighs, and instead your back muscles are lengthening. So think of it as opposing action and reaction, and what are the forces at play in your body, both in terms of the skeletal structures, like for example compression, like bone against bone, or for example muscles, when you contract and when you elongate, or you concentrate eccentrically, like contract the muscles, so on and so forth. So this is just an idea, and I want to plant a seed in your mind to begin to think about it this way. So let's go back to the idea of warrior two. So when you move the legs away from the midline, what happens? There's muscles on the inside. So you might feel some stretching in your groin area, right? That this like juicy sensation when your legs move apart. The same as in what? Wide-legged forward fold. Right? Before we move into the forward fold, when you spread your legs apart, or even seated wide-legged forward fold, what happens in that seated position when you spread your legs apart? The muscles on the inside lengthen. So once we start to look at it this way, then we can start to group different poses as well in terms of what is similar and what is different, which muscles are being used, what is the purpose of this pose. And then if a student is injured, or if this pose or this specific variation is not accessible to him or her, what other options can I do? Can I offer the student to honor this student, to meet this student where he or she is, so that they can still enjoy the benefits of yoga without forcing their bodies to get into this pose? After all, at the end of the day, the goal is not to achieve the pose. We use these poses to achieve certain functions of contracting, elongating, relaxing the muscles, so that we can achieve these health benefits, both physical, mental, and spiritual, if you believe in the spiritual aspect. Okay, so let's go back to warrior two, and I still want to talk a little bit about the front part of it. So the front part, what happens is your knee is bent. Right, so if we examine the anatomy of warrior two, it is actually very similar to Trikonasana, except your front knee is bent instead of straight, or at a diagonal like this, right? Depending on how you look at it, which angle you look at it, which plane you look at it. So when you bend your front knee and you straighten, what happens? Some muscles contract and some muscles lengthen for you to get into the pose and for you to move out from the pose. So it would be very, very beneficial when you, for example, describe to your student, maybe even if you describe getting into warrior two, let's say you bend your front knee and then you feel the sensation in your thigh. Where do you feel this pose? Do you feel it here on your quad area, the quads that wrap around the top of your thigh? Do you feel it on your glute, your right glute, because your right knee is bent and you're using that, and there's some contraction that's going on, and you might be using your glute to hold yourself in that position. So talking about the glute, I will move away a little bit from this topic, and I just want to point it out to you also that there's so much variation that did you know that the glute muscle, your buttock muscle, there's maximus, medius, and minimus, these three muscles. But some people don't have the minimus muscle. And this makes a huge difference. Can you imagine if your student did not have the minimus muscle, and how would that affect their anatomy? How would that affect the way they walked, so on and so forth? So these things are very, very important. One other thing I want to talk about when we talk about alignment is, I know that within yoga, there's this huge preoccupation with the idea that the knee cannot go past the ankle. Have you ever heard in chair pose, for example, keep the knee, when you sit down into a chair pose, make sure you can see your toes, your knees should not move beyond the ankle. This is well-meaning, of course, but think about when you climb the stairs, up and down the stairs. What happens when you climb the stairs? Just think about it. And if you're not sure, go and try climb the stairs. Take a moment. Every time you climb the stairs, your knee moves past the ankle. This will always happen. And this is the function, this is how your body is designed. If our knees didn't move past the ankle, we wouldn't be able, for example, to run, to climb the stairs, to do all kinds of things. And if you've seen, for example, anatomy from other movement modalities, including dance, for example, the knee moves past the ankle a lot of the times. So then it begs the question, why is it in yoga we say that the knee cannot move past the ankle? What is the purpose? Well, for example, when we stack the joints, so-called stacking the joints, this is another cue that, let's come back to this later on. When you align the joints, let's say our wrists, like we are in tabletop, imagine you're in tabletop on all fours, right? A good cue usually would be to let your wrists, elbows, and shoulders align. And then let your knees come underneath your pelvis, hip distance apart. Why do we do this? So that when everything aligns, this minimizes the amount of force that is not, how would I put it? It minimizes the unnecessary effort that is required to hold you in the pose. So everything is stacked in that sense. And the same I would believe in Warrior 2, that this is, the purpose of the function of the pose. But if your student, for example, has his or her knee past the ankle, and for them there's not much of a problem with regards to alignment, then is that necessarily a problem? Do you necessarily need to ask them to widen the legs apart so that the knee comes aligned with the ankle? What is your purpose in this pose? What if they cannot abduct or move their legs apart so wide? Another cue I often hear teachers say, right, and my own favorite teachers in the past, so I used to hear them say this, is in your wide-legged forward fold, align your feet, your ankles with your wrists. This is problematic because many people, right, it depends on your pelvis how wide you can abduct your legs. Some people can only abduct them a little. Some people can abduct them a lot. I'm one of those people who had no problem to abduct my legs really wide apart. And of course, they easily matched now when I lengthen my arms right below where my wrists were. But there are people in the class, for example, if you give this cue, they're like, what's going on? My legs just cannot move so far away. And what happens? They reach bone compression because their femur bone, right, hits the edge of the socket in which the pelvis is, and the bone just cannot move further. So it could be muscular, it could be also bone on bone, which is compression. So we, as yoga teachers, I really invite you to think about this and to be more mindful and to think when you sequence or when you include a pose, what's going on in that pose? What is the purpose of this pose? And if the pose is to achieve a certain stretch, then does it need to look specifically like that? Maybe the feet just need to be wide enough until they feel some sensation in the inside of their groins. Notice how the cue has changed from something that is external, focus on how it looks, to something that is internal, focus on how it feels and how it is from the inside. So this is the shift that I would like to invite you to think about as we move away from aesthetic yoga to a more functional approach in yoga. And I think now more than ever, with the age of Instagram, with lots of bendy yoga teachers being able to do crazy, amazing, wonderful poses with their legs behind their head, standing on their hands, all kinds of poses. Now people think this is yoga. But I truly believe that us as yoga teachers who truly know what yoga is, it is our responsibility to educate and to guide your students. And many of your students will not be able to do any of these insane poses with insane alignment. It takes a certain kind of skeletal structure and muscular structure to be able to do those poses. It's not just a matter of practice. And sometimes you may practice 10, 20, 30 years, 50 years, and you will never be able to do some of these poses. And this might not just apply to your students, it might apply to you as well. I know for myself, like I've seen injuries, I've seen kinds of abnormalities, or as you've seen, I have so-called hyperextended elbows, and I love them, right? So I have to work with all this. So instead of treating the body as something that you use to get into this shape, think of the shape and how it can benefit your body, and then adjust so that your body still gets the benefit of whatever the shape was intended for. So this is really the key of today's episode. And the last point I want to talk about is the I word. The I word is called interoception. And interoception is the idea of feeling from inside, understanding and sensing from inside, not from the outside, but from inside. So when you do a pose, if, for example, as you are moving through your daily practice, or if you're attending another class with another teacher, as you're being guided through the movements, along with listening to the cues, along with flowing with your breath, for example, I want to invite you to really start to feel the movement. Where am I feeling it in the body? If that seems a bit strange, a bit foreign, or seems like quite hard to begin with, you can try by closing your eyes first. And as you step into a movement, as you change from one pose to the other, that is a very, very good point to start to begin to feel. And you can also experiment with different variations or different small adjustments in the pose. Like even, for example, for downward facing dog, very often we cue arms shoulder distance apart, right? Maybe for some people, this feels good. And maybe for some people, a little bit wider feels good. Maybe for some people, the palms turned outwards feels good. So nothing is with the palms as well, for example, because there's so much variation. If you think about it, if there's the torque here, and we know that the two bones here, the ulna and the radius, they are actually twisted, and there's this torque that's going on, right? This will actually affect, for example, your palm as well and your wrists. So everything is interconnected. And when you cue certain things, for example, if you're on all fours, like for example, I often see teachers cueing the eye of the elbow should be facing each other. And I'm like, my eye of the elbow will never face each other. I have to bend my arms massively for them to meet each other. And that's not the integrity. That's not keeping the integrity of the purpose of the pose already. Think about this and then start to feel for yourself, even if the teacher that you're attending the class of, or for example, even if in your yoga teacher training you were taught certain things, now is the process to begin unlearning the things that they may have taught you, so that it is easier to understand the pose and have a basic understanding, and then now taking it to the next level and really integrating it, really crystallizing it, so you know it's so thorough from inside out, and no one can point out to you what a triangle, what a downward facing dog looks like. Only you know in your body. So when you are able to cue, to guide your students to reach that level, and they can cultivate that sense of interoception, imagine that. So you're not teaching them, you're not helping them fish. You're teaching them how to fish, so that they will never go hungry a single day in their lives. Imagine that. And they can practice freely on their own without you, knowing in full confidence that they are doing the right thing. And also they have this open mind, and they know how to experiment without getting injuries, without necessarily putting themselves in a dangerous situation. This to me, I think, is the ultimate level of what a great teacher can do. And I really hope that today's episode is a seed that I can plant in your mind, in your heart, that will guide you to move more towards this direction. Okay, so I'm going to have a quick look to see if anyone has any questions. I see a couple of you tuning in. Please reply in the comments. Let me know if you have any questions. If this episode has been useful for you, I would love to hear that as well. Yeah, so it seems like no questions yet for now. So next week's episode will be focused on interoception. So it will be an experiential session, if you don't mind me, in which I will guide you through a couple of poses. It will be more workshop style, so don't expect to perspire or don't expect to move through a flow. The purpose of next week's masterclass is to begin to explore and experiment what alignment means and feels for you. And I'm not going to give you answers. I'm only going to give you a couple of guidelines. And then I would like you to play, to explore as a teacher, to guide yourself from within. The more you do this and the more often you do this, the better you will be at cultivating it inside for yourself, and the better you will be at sharing this with your students and guiding this in your classes as well. Okay, so I think with that, I've come to the end of today's masterclass. I'm going to have a quick look to see if there's anything else I'd like to talk about. Okay, no. All right, so if you have any questions, for example, on specific cues with regards to alignments that you have a little bit concerned about, you can feel free to drop them in the comment box or leave them in the Inspire Yoga Teachers group as well. Later on today, I will be talking about a special announcement. So in May to July, quick announcement here, I will be offering a 12-week mentorship program. And this will be a special mentorship program in which I will guide you through not just the teaching aspect, how to build confidence as a yoga teacher and to teach from a place of true knowledge. So I know a lot of you've probably downloaded this whole bit of information from your 200 hour and you're like, oh my God, I have to process all of this. And then at the same time, you're like, I don't feel confident. I don't know what I'm doing. Or like maybe you sequence a class and you've planned the entire class and you wrote down all of the script that you have to say and all the cues you have to say for every single pose. And then you still feel, oh shit, I don't really know what I'm doing. Or you feel like, what happens if there's a student who comes to my class and I cannot teach this pose? Or for example, this transition doesn't work. So this 12-week mentorship program will deal with these aspects, and I will teach you various tips and tricks and also provide you a framework to guide you to begin to teach from a place of confidence, of true knowledge, of guiding students to cultivate interoception. So we move away from this aesthetic yoga to a functional yoga in which we really understand what the pose is for, why we are doing it, and how we can use this to benefit your students. The other part of it will be the aspect of building your career as a yoga teacher or yoga instructor, depending on how you like to look at yourself. All right, so for myself, I've been teaching for over 5 years. This is the 6th year now, and now I teach full-time. So I transitioned from teaching part-time to full-time. And that, whoa, was a hell of a career and a hell of ups and downs. And I know for you probably now, taking your yoga teacher training, especially if you did it in the last 1 or 2 years, probably you would have felt that your YTT was very, very enriching and you really enjoyed the experience. But probably the business aspects, for example, of how to stand out from other yoga teachers, how to begin to connect with students, how to begin to, for example, create a yoga program for your students or create a series of classes that will get your students coming back for more. And I know a lot of you have questions, the field has so many free yoga offerings, how do I stand out? Well, the first thing to do to stand out is you have to know what are your strengths. What is it that you are offering and who is it you are uniquely positioned to serve? So this program will cover all of this, and also I'll teach you a couple of different tips, tricks. I'll give you guidelines and a framework that's worked for me to build the successful career that I have right now teaching. Now I teach only online, 100% online. And on average, I teach only 1 or 2 classes a day, and every week I have 1 free day, and I make a good living as a yoga teacher just by teaching. I also do consulting on the side, of course, but I just wanted to tell you that it is possible and believe that it is possible, but you have to work smart and you have to understand, for example, that free is not the way. Yes, you can do free things at the beginning, but it is a matter of energy exchange. Everything we do, I think it goes back to intention, just like for functional yoga, right? When we explore the poses, what is the function? Why am I doing this? You know, what is the objective I'm trying to achieve? Are there other ways that are smarter, other ways that are more direct, or other ways that are like less effortful that can help me reach the same goal instead of going through all these effort, these trouble, these kinds of things. And also within this program, we will talk about how to differentiate when it is important to persist, to stay longer using the approach that you've done for your marketing, for your promotion, for your yoga classes, so on and so forth, and when it is the time to call quits and know that this tactic is not working, we'll switch and we'll have to quickly pivot from there. So I've done everything from scratch myself. And of course, I've also been hired as a contractor for yoga studios, for gyms, I've taught for resorts. So I'll be sharing my tips on how you can get employed by all of these different parties as well, and how you can snag a job teaching your online for a different platform, or for example, a studio of your dreams. So this will be covered in the 12-week program. And so this program is worth $1,647 per person, 12-week program. Because this is the pilot program, this is the first cohort, I know this blueprint, this whole thing works because I'm living proof of it. Every day I enjoy this great life, I would say, thankfully, that I have right now, sharing what I really truly value with people who enjoy my classes. But because this is the first cohort, I want to make sure that this really answers your needs, because your needs will be different from mine based on where you are right now. And for example, the content might need to be adjusted to you. So I'm offering this free, 100% free, 12 weeks of mentorship. And for this program, this is by application only. So I cannot take on every single teacher. I'm only going to take on teachers who are fully committed to the program and whose goals, whose values align with me as a teacher and as a teacher trainer. So this will benefit both sides. And I know some of you, for example, maybe you joined the group because you're curious about the group and you would love to learn from these series of masterclasses. So I'm very glad to have you here. But this program is specifically for newer yoga teachers. So if you're tuning in, you've been teaching for quite some time, this program may not be relevant to you. So if you're interested, stay tuned. Shortly within the group, there will be a post going out about it. If you are interested in the program, this 12-week program, mentorship program, leave a comment and I will send you a link, a private message with the link, with all the details, with the dates, the estimated dates, with the timings, and then with the application procedure. It is not going to be easy to apply because I'm a very picky person and I like to pick who I want to work with, because as those of you who have joined the 5-day challenge, you know, I really am very committed to showing up for my mentees. So I want to show up fully and be there for you. And therefore, I want you to show up and do the work. And I want you to be fully committed to the process as well. So it's not a matter of how much money you put in the program. It is your effort, your time, your concentration, your heart and your soul. How much do you really want to really elevate your teaching? How much do you really care? Did you come to teaching yoga just because something else happened and then you took this on because it was a convenient opportunity? Or are you serious about this and you really want to share the message of yoga? You really want to bring your teaching and your career as a yoga teacher, not just as a certified teacher, but as a great teacher, as a teacher that your students will remember 5-10 years down the road. When they are talking with their friends, they'll be saying like, oh, I did this program with this teacher, she's so great, that really changed my life. Is that where you see yourself? If this is where you see yourself and you need help, then I really encourage you to apply for this program. And that's it. We've come to the end of today's episode. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll just have a quick look to see if anyone has any questions or comments. Okay, one quick comment, let's see. Okay, Fanny had a question for people with hyperextended arms. Very good question. So what happens with hyperextended arms? Is it necessarily a problem? So hyperextended arms are only a problem when it is in a weight-bearing pose. So you see here, this part of my joint, right, the forearm and the wrist, it's not very heavy, and so I don't really worry with holding it in this position. All right, I'm holding my arm up effortlessly in this position. But for example, imagine I were holding a dumbbell. Okay, now I will actually go and get a dumbbell just to show you. Okay, I hope I don't injure myself. So now I'm holding a 3 kg dumbbell, and that's gonna take a lot of weight. Imagine all this force moving downwards. What's gonna happen? It's gonna pull on my shoulder joint here, right? So what can I do? And just like in downward facing dog as well, if you imagine, downward facing dog is an inverted triangle in which a lot of the weight is down on your arms. And your arms, you have to actively push through your index and your big thumb knuckle, right, to find that force to push away from the mat so that you have that strength to lift your tailbone up towards the sky. So what happens with people with hyperextended arms like me? The tendency or the risk happens when people lock their joints. And the same is with your knees. If you have a tendency, or if you see students who have the tendency to lock their joints, what happens? It immobilizes the joint. You cannot engage the muscle around the surrounding joint, so your forearm here and your bicep here cannot engage. You can contract, but you cannot really support this joint. So then it becomes a problem, and it might shear, it might cause a break or fracture if, for example. So, but usually in downward facing dog, that never happens. It's a little bit dramatic. Usually it has to be something like a sudden force that will cause a shear. But anyway, so what you can do, long story short, if you see students locking their joints in downward facing dog, in, for example, any other pose, you can tell them to micro bend their elbow so they feel a little bit of engagement in their muscle. And you can try this yourself as well. You don't need to have hyperextended arms to feel this. So let's say you lock your joint. Feel what's happening. You can contract the muscle, but it might not be supporting, right? And now, so just bend your knee or your, for example, your elbow just a tiny bit and then contract and feel the difference, what's happening. There's a little bit more synergy, right, in this movement. Can you feel the difference? And then gently release. So this is one exercise I like to invite, for example, my students to do if I see that they tend to lock their knee joints or lock their elbow joints. So a lot of the time when you're standing, you might find you're locking the knee joint to release the weight. So it's easier to stand, right, with your knees locked. So it's less effort, because when you don't lock your knees, you need the strength of the muscles to hold you up. So that's what's happening actually when you don't lock the joints. And when you lock the joints, it's kind of like just hanging out there. So this is what you can do with them. And yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I'm gonna quickly check if anyone has anything else to ask or to say. Okay, no, it seems like not. Right, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll get back to them later on. I'll also share the link for the expert interview with Bernie Clark below. And yeah, please take care and have a great week ahead. The more details will follow on the 12-week mentorship program later on. Okay, all right, thanks so much for tuning in. Okay. And I'll see you soon.